Hey, MCARBO brother. I'm Chris Nelson, president of MCARBO. Really excited to introduce the Smith Wesson M&P Shield 2.0 trigger spring kit for your Shield pistol. Really love this pistol now that we've got this phenomenal kit, a 55% trigger pull reduction, night and day. We did the polishing in this video. Really excited about this. Full on, full spectrum, clean, smooth trigger pull with a nice, crisp reset. Heavy duty trigger return spring. Certain models, certain pistols require that sort of design. We did it for the Glock pistols as well. You need a good solid reset. You don't want to have a sluggish, slow reset. Those follow-up shots are critical. So we made sure heavy duty trigger return spring and then lighter springs all across the board to help offset the heavy duty spring. Really phenomenal. Excellent trigger pull reduction, 55%. You can't beat it. Went from 5.5 pounds down to 2.5 pounds. Absolutely amazing. Love this pistol. Night and day. Let's get on our tabletop, show you how we did this. Parts needed for this build: the Smith Wesson M&P Shield 2.0 trigger spring kit by MCARBO. Works with the 2.0 Shield only. In this kit, you're going to get the synthetic grease at PTFE. Works in conjunction with the silicon carbide 1000 grit sandpaper. An excellent way to knock off some of those burrs and rough machining lines from some of the parts, particularly that striker safety. So that's something we're really going to focus on. We're even going to put some nice radiuses on the top edge of it. It's going to look great. A custom lighter striker spring, a custom lighter striker safety spring, custom lighter Sear spring, and then an assembly tool for this trigger return spring. So this is an extra power trigger return spring. It's going to help give you a nice crisp reset. Now this kit will reduce the trigger pull significantly, but one thing that is commonly overlooked in a lot of spring kits is a trigger return spring. Depending on how it's designed, if you put a real light trigger return spring in there, it could render it inoperable or have a really sluggish, slow reset. So this extra power trigger return spring is a must and a phenomenal improvement for the Shield. Really love this kit. We'll go ahead and jump into it now. Tools needed for this build: 1/16 inch punch, 3/32 inch punch, 1/8 inch punch, bench block, hammer, a 1/16 inch Allen key, micro tip flathead screwdriver, a wooden dowel of some sort. If you don't have one, you can use the sub 2000 assembly dowel we've got for sale on the website. A firearm and feed ramp polishing kit that we offer. It's got a 1/2 ounce can of Flitz polish, 3 bullet-shaped felt bits, a microfiber towel, 6mm nitrile gloves. Great way to get some extra dexterity when you're getting those intricate parts in hand and you're trying to use the Dremel, polish them up. We're going to do a quick polishing segment here. I'm excited about it. Heat gun is great. This is going to be for removing that rear sight set screw. So you need to heat it up. It's got red Loctite on it. You can also use some masking tape to protect that rear sight when we're trying to remove it, but this dowel makes a very inexpensive sight removal tool. Highly recommend it, but you could use the masking tape and a punch. And as always, guys, make sure you wear an eye pro. All right, real quick before we jump into it, this is the polishing kit. You get the 3 felt bullet-shaped bits. Excellent way to get in those tight crevices. 1/2 ounce can of Flitz, microfiber towel, which is great for hand polishing, and the 6mm nitrile gloves. You will need a rotary tool. Dremel works great, but it is a little pricey. You can get a cheaper $8 option at Harbor Freight. Really easy way to go if you don't have one. Great way to get into it. And if you do a lot of it, upgrade to a Dremel later. Now, just for an example, I want to show you, here's 2 Glock slides here. I did a video on the Glock 22 here, and this is the Glock 27. You can see one of them is polished really nicely. You can see this striker safety is polished here, really smooth and buttery, and this stock one is not. It's got a burr. It's actually got that little dimple on the end from where it comes off the machine there. So just some of the machining things, there's no secondary ops or not actually getting them on a wheel and polishing them up like we're gonna do with the polishing bits and that Dremel and the Flitz polish. Really love it. And you can see here the tip of the striker that engages with the Sear, nice and buttery smooth. All those machining marks are gone. That's gonna give you a nice, clean, crisp trigger pull. It's not gonna be gritty and hesitant and weird, springy, none of that crap. Smooth, light, clean, crisp trigger pull. So we're going to do a lot of work here, but it's really going to pay off, and you can see just the difference just by looking at it. I mean, which one would you rather have? So really love the polishing. Yeah, all my videos just go on and on about how much I love polishing. It's really weird. I don't know why I love polishing so much. It's kind of therapeutic, but let's get into this build now. Before we get started, let's go ahead and take this opportunity together, check our firearms, make sure they're clear. Check the chamber, check the bolt face, check the magazine well. This firearm's clear. Now, some of the Smith & Wesson M&P Shields have a magazine safety in them, meaning you can't pull the trigger, you can't dry fire unless you've got a mag to insert, so always make sure your mag's empty before you do, of course, common sense. This one does not, but typically if you did have a mag safety, you wouldn't be able to do anything unless that mag was in. So we're gonna go ahead and measure the factory trigger pull to see what we got to start with, but you can already tell it's kind of gritty, kind of feels kind of hesitant there when you get to the back of it. Just not as ideal as it could be. So we're gonna go ahead and measure this pull. I just want to point that out. Don't want you to get caught off guard thinking that you got something wrong with your pistol. This one does not have a magazine safety. Let's see what kind of factory trigger pull we're starting with. 5 pounds, 9.1 ounces. Let's take one more, confirm. 5 pounds, 6.7 ounces. All right, so we get started with a real basic field strip. Now, there's a couple ways to take this down. You could either push down on the Sear deactivation lever here. It's that yellow lever inside there, so you could push it down, and that allows you to take down the pistol without having to pull the trigger if you're uncomfortable with that. Really kind of weird. If you're used to just pulling the trigger, it's fine. Either way, you've got to have the slide open so you can check it. Obsessive compulsive here. Chamber, bolt face, magazine well, it's clear. We're good to pull the trigger. We've got to have the slide open anyway. Pull down on the takedown lever, just like that. And then we're going to release the slide. Now you're going to get to this point where you want to go forward. You got to pull the trigger. And now you can pull it off. Just like that. So a couple ways to do it. We're going to go ahead and put the pistol grip frame aside for now. We're going to focus on the slide first. We start by removing the recoil spring and guide rod. Just push forward, pops right out of place. Then just push up on the barrel from underneath, pull the barrel right out. All right, now what we need to do is remove the back plate. So in order to remove the back plate, take your little micro tip flathead screwdriver. You see that little piece of plastic down in there with the striker? You just got to push down on that piece of plastic, and that's going to allow you to actually push the back plate off. Real simple, very similar to the Glock. So if you're a Glock fan, you've got one, you've gotten familiar with it, that's the way it goes, just like that. Now, to get the striker out, what we've got to do is push down on the striker block safety. And this is cool too, because you get to see how it interacts with one another. You push down, and now the rest of the components come out, just like that. So there's the striker spring and sleeve right here, the plastic piece. So this is how it'll go back together, just like this. All right, we'll replace this here in a second. Now we've got to get access to the striker safety. So to get access to this, unfortunately, we've got to remove the rear sight. And the rear sight, if you haven't removed it yet, it's got this set screw right here and it's held in with red Loctite. Probably gonna have to heat it up, but at least we've got everything that's plastic out of there, so we're good to go. All we have to do is just put a little heat on it. It's steel, it's not gonna hurt it, and then we'll be able to pop it out with that 1/16 inch Allen key. But we'll start with the heat first. Get your heat gun ready and let's go ahead and get through it. All right, so I got my heat gun warming up now. I'm just gonna put some heat right there on top of that sight, particularly that set screw. We just wanna get enough heat in there so that we can get past the temp rating on the Loctite, and then we're good to go. So let it heat up for about 30 seconds or so, and then we'll test it with our 1/16 inch Allen key. If you don't have a heat gun, you can try other means, but this is the one I'd recommend, that won't affect your finish negatively. All right, about a good 30 seconds or so. Now I'm going to test it with the 1/16 inch Allen key to see if I can get it to pop. There we go, like butter. So that's the way to do it right there. Now I'm going to turn my heat gun off. All right, so just be careful. It's going to be pretty hot. Use your 1/16 inch Allen key, get that set screw out. I can see there's the red Loctite on it there. When we put this back in, we're going to use blue Loctite. Doesn't need to be red. Red's just got that higher temp rating. It'll be fine. In case you need to remove it again in the future, you won't have to use the heat. So we'll set this down. Now, one thing about this is if you look underneath, here's your striker safety right here on the left side. So let's push this side that way. So just take a quick look. Here's the safety. All right, so we just want to get a little bit of clearance here so we can get that spring out. So what we'll do is we'll set it up on the bench block. All right, so we're going to go ahead and push out the sight now. All right, so I like to start with the masking tape and a punch. If you got a brass punch, that is ideal. Less likely to damage, the steel sight there, but if all you got steel punch, it'll be fine. Just make sure you cover it up good with some masking tape like we're doing here. We're just going to layer it up real thick. We want to make sure we get that little crease right there. That's where we're going to be hitting. 3 or 4 or 5 layers thick. After that, it's just overkill. You still want to be able to hit that ledge. That's most important. Make sure that ledge is good and defined so I can find it, not slip off. All right, got the punch on the ledge. Give it a couple good hits. All right, and after you got a good hit, you might want to move your punch because it'll start ripping through that masking tape. So just kind of move it over just a hair. All right, I already feel it kind of shifting, so we're good. So now I'm just going to use this dowel just to finish it off. Almost there. So you can see there's the striker safety spring right in there underneath that piece of plastic. So give it one more good whack and we should be good. You know, wooden dowel always comes in handy. All right, there it is. So if you start on the correct side, the same side as that safety, you're good. I mean, you don't have to go too far. You don't have to go all the way. All right, so we'll go ahead and pull out the striker safety spring. You see that little plastic follower right there, just keeps it in place, compresses it into the striker safety there. So we'll set the spring aside. And what we'll do now is move that sight a little bit further so we can get that striker safety out. It's got to come out through the top. All right, should be good now. There it is. So the striker safety, you'll notice this end was the end you could see on the bottom side of the slide. And you'll notice this end here has got a rim on it, a little bit wider than the rest of the safety. That's because there's a little ledge in there in the slide for that safety to rest on, and it's captured. It can only go so far. All right, so everything's out at this point, so we can set the slide down for a minute. All right, so these are the parts we're going to mess with here for a minute. We need to replace the two springs, the striker spring and the striker safety spring, and then we're going to polish the striker safety itself and then the striker. Most importantly, this tip right here that engages with the Sear, but we can polish the whole striker if we want. We probably will. All right, so go ahead and open up our kit, get the springs out. Also need that synthetic grease with PTFE and that silicon carbide sandpaper. Really going to do a nice number getting rid of those machine lines and those burrs. All right, so this is the whole kit here. All right, so you got your 1000 grit right here, so we'll need that. Our synthetic grease of PTFE, and then our spring. So we'll need the striker spring here, set that down, and then we'll need the striker safety spring right here. So we'll set that down. Now these three springs we'll go ahead and put back in the bag. We don't need them just yet. This is the trigger return spring, and then this is the Sear spring, and this is the guide, the assembly tool for the trigger return spring. So we'll keep those separated from the stock springs. All right, I'm going to do a quick little swap here on the striker safety spring. All right, so you can see these are the two springs right here. So MCARBO spring right here. I'm going to go ahead and just pop off the factory one. You might want to designate a place for the factory springs just so you don't get them mixed up. I'm going to put the MCARBO spring back on that little nipple right there for it to locate. Keeps it centered, keeps it from getting bent when it's inside. It's always good to make sure it's seated completely. All right, so we'll go ahead and set this down. We'll need it for reassembly here in a second. All right, so now for the striker disassembly. Just helps have your bench block so you can push down on an edge. All right, got this little channel right here. Rest the engagement feature of the actual striker on an edge. Push down on the striker spring, and then that collar will pop right out. You'll notice it's a U-shaped collar, and this is the orientation right here. So it's going to go in just like that. That narrow end is what goes inside the spring, and it locates on the narrow piece of the striker. I'll show you here in a second. All right, so there's the factory spring. Set that aside at the other one. We're not going to replace with the MCARBO spring yet because we're going to do some polishing of the striker real quick. Now we'll take the sleeve right off and the little sleeve spring that goes with it. It looks completely different, you know, real simple little spring. All right, we'll set these two items aside. Now we've got our striker ready to polish this baby up and make it just bling and shine. This is how we get a nice, clean, smooth, nice feeling trigger pull. So we'll go ahead and polish these two items right here, the striker safety and the striker. Most importantly, we'll do a little sanding at the top of the striker safety here. See that little dimple on that safety? That's from this part running on a lathe, and when it's done, this is the little piece of material that's left, and that's usually where it breaks off and falls into the little bin. So this is not supposed to be there. Run your fingernail over the top of it, you'll feel it grabbing, and that's what you're feeling every time you pull the trigger too. And this engagement area here too, on the striker itself, we're going to polish this up real nice, but we'll go ahead and polish the whole entire portion of these parts. It's not going to hurt it, it's just going to make it buttery smooth, which we like on a good trigger pull. All right, so I'll set the rest of these items aside. Lighter spring, keep it separated from the factory one. What we'll do is we'll start first with a little bit of sanding on the striker safety. Most importantly, getting these machining lines and that little tab off the top of it. And then not to mention, you'll notice there's no real radius on the edges here of this striker safety. It's kind of like a chamfer. It's more of a sharp angle. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and smooth it all out just so there's no sharp corners there. If you look at the Glock slide from the start here, this is one that was done previously, shined up beautifully. There's no sharp edge on the top. This one's got a very distinct sharp edge here, so we're gonna eliminate that. And we're gonna polish it up real nice. So it's gonna be real smooth and buttery. That's all we need to sand is the top and the top edge, and that's it. It's real simple, straightforward. Now this is so important because the linkage on that trigger bar is gonna ride along and hit that striker safety. So what we wanna do is make it as smooth as possible. Metal on metal grinding is what gives you that gritty trigger pull. All right, so we get started, just take our synthetic grease with PTFE. It's kind of like a little bit of a wet sand. So what we'll do is we'll get some grease and we'll put it on the paper itself. It helps too to get the paper to stick to the table, add a little bit on the bottom and almost will just kind of stick there. It's handy. And then obviously I got a ton of grease on that paper right now, so I don't need much more, but the idea is to not create any more friction than necessary. So we'll keep it flat, we'll do little circles. So we'll start out, try to keep it as flat as possible, you know, a good flat surface to sand on is the idea. And it would be really hard to significantly change the geometry, and that's why we include such a small piece, 1000 grit. You know, we don't want anybody going overboard like 6 hours of sanding. You know, that might do it, but you know, we're just doing a couple minutes, knocking off burrs, making it smooth. Nice little circular motion, medium pressure. All right, let's see how we did. All right, getting there. You can still see that feature's there, but it's hardly, you can hardly feel it. So that's good. So let's keep going. Back and forth, side to side. Circular. Either one will work. Just good even pressure, you know, medium pressure. It's not like we're trying to really grind this thing. We're just doing the finishing work. Oh yeah, perfect. So we're pretty much already there. Barely feel that little dimple in there. And this thing is nice and smooth already. So we'll keep hitting it a little bit more, and then we'll focus on this top little chamfer here. We're gonna make it more of a radius. You know, chamfer leaves you a sharp edge. So there's two edges there. We're just gonna make it more of a radius all the way around, and that'll be it. Top a little bit more, and then we'll transition into making that chamfer into more of a radius. And the polishing is really gonna help smooth it out as well, so no need to go too crazy on the sanding here. You know, it is 1000 grit, so it's super fine. All right, now we're gonna go ahead and transition. So what we're gonna do here is just basically put it at a 45 and then just kind of rotate around. You know, I'm turning it in my hands as I'm moving, so try to keep it even. It'd be really hard to create any more flat spots on here, but that's not what you want to do. So to give you a better idea, I'll just do it kind of like this. And you can do it like this. You can just have it in your fingers. You know, if you're especially worried, if you're worried about taking too much off, we're just having a 45-degree angle here. We're just hitting that top angle, and then so we're hitting the top angle first up here, and then we'll be hitting that bottom angle here in a second. That'll be it. But we're just moving it around, making sure we get that edge. Nice. All right, so you can already see that sharpness is really disappearing. You know, that distinct hard edge is kind of disappearing on the top here. And that'll be next down here on that other hard edge right there, turning it more into a radius. So it doesn't have to be a real drastic radius. We're talking small here. You know, it's real delicate finishing work, so it's not anything we're doing with machines or anything like that. It's all just hand polishing, finishing work. And that's the best way to do it, because you can check your progress as you're going, avoid mistakes. You can take off material, but you just can never add it back on. So it's always good to just slow and methodical. You know, it's a great little way to relax too. I love it, man. It takes time, but you can see the results happening right before your eyes. It's pretty cool. It's gonna feel really cool too, so I'm excited about that. All right, I'm really kind of getting that 45 going. See that, how I'm really attacking those edges? Not trying to create any more flat, I'm just trying to get those two sharp points, that top sharp edge and the bottom. And I'm working on that bottom now. And you could even take this paper, and if you wanted to, you could just basically turn it. And you could take this paper and just turn it like this too. Oh man, that is great. Look at that. Already getting there. Yeah. That's improvement right there. And that's gonna feel, we do this all together, it's gonna be a night and day difference. You know, if you just did one thing, it's not gonna be as big a deal, but once we're done, it's gonna be a night and day difference. So if you can run your fingers along, your fingernail along, and it doesn't feel like a sharp edge, you're good, all right? You can still feel a real sharp edge, maybe keep going, but the goal is not to go too much here. We just want to go enough to get that little radius, just kind of the rounded corner. We're not trying to turn this into a ball. There's a little bit more there. I'm going to go a little longer, and then we'll proceed to the polish. And the polish does a heck of a job bringing it all together here. Might help get a little grip at the towel as well. Yeah, it's nice. Make sure you get enough grease on there. Mine actually is kind of dry at the moment, so we want to do like a wet sand. We don't want it to be a hard friction sand. It's kind of a lubricated sand. Helps ensure we don't do anything negative to the part. Just want to make sure we get a nice wet sand. We don't want it drying out. We don't want any unnecessary friction. I'm just checking right now to make sure I got all the edges good. It's that high detailed finishing work. You know, we're just, every little tiny piece of this part is getting real good attention. If they did this at the factory, they'd be way too expensive. Too much labor, too many man hours in it. Really dries up the cost. So it's cool we can do this ourselves and really get something custom, something really nice, to the point that it'll be night and day different. All right, now add a little more grease. If you got your folded paper like this, good, you've been following along. If not, go ahead and fold it up like this. Just kind of roll it over. And if your hands are greasy, grab your towel. And we're just gonna turn the part a little bit just to make sure there's no burrs on this flat part right here. And I highly doubt there is. We're just gonna give it a couple turns. We're already doing this, might as well. Just like that. We're gonna pinch it like that and hold it in the paper, you know, get some grip on it, and then just turn it. And then you can kind of let it walk its way off the top, and it'll get those radiuses one last time. Oh, look at that. That baby's already smooth, man. That feels nice. It's already kind of starting to shine a little bit. Wait till we get the polish on here. That's perfect, man. That's awesome. Run your nail over it. Should be very faint, if anything. And you might only feel that little tiny dimple in there. It's gonna be hard to get the cosmetic look off, but it's gonna be pretty simple with 1000 grit to get that feel to disappear, which is what we want. We're more the feel right now. So you're kind of using that sense of touch right now, and don't really worry about how it looks. If it feels smooth, that's gonna translate into a nice, smooth, clean trigger pull. So that's good right there. All right, so now we're gonna focus on the striker. We're gonna do a tiny bit of sanding, and that's it. This is what's engaging with the Sear. So, you know, if you don't feel comfortable doing this, skip this part, but it's not gonna hurt. We're just basically going to lightly sand, you know, with just put the paper in your hands like this and just kind of run it over. We're not really setting it on a firm surface and going back and forth all day. We're just kind of giving a real light sand. You know, I don't recommend putting it on the table. There's no need. You know, kind of just making sure that we get any sort of burrs off of there. And if you've got a used one, you've probably already kind of smoothed it out over time if you put a few thousand rounds through it. All right, so make sure you got enough synthetic grease on that paper and the part. But we're just really focusing on the engagement surface right now. Just trying to knock off any burrs. There is a bit of a parting line in the center of this part, which tells you it was not machined, it was molded or casted or something. All right, that's good. So really fast, really light, just kind of making sure there's no rough edges. Feels good. All right, already noticeably a little bit better. Made sure it was all kind of smooth. You can see that parting line still there, and it's all about that feel. So we're gonna polish it up nice, and that is 100% the best way to go. You know, risk-free. It's not gonna change geometry or anything like that. So we're good. So we'll polish these two parts, and then we'll be on our way. All right, so now we're gonna polish the striker and the striker safety. I would highly recommend wearing eye pro. You should be already, but if you're not, definitely put it on. Here's the polishing kit, microfiber towel. The gloves really help give you a little more dexterity when you're holding these little tiny parts. And then the Flitz polish, industry standard, and then the felt bits. We'll go ahead and throw a felt bit into our Dremel rotary tool. You know, Harbor Freight's got the $8 option, which is a really good deal. It'll work for a little while too. We still have ours that we started with. All right. So rotary tool set up. I'll go ahead and lay this towel out. Now I went ahead and moved everything off the table because this Flitz polish is going to go everywhere. So if you're on your kitchen table, you might want to get a really big towel, keep the wife happy. But you know, keep the firearm parts away from this because it's going to get messy and you're going to have to clean it really good. I've done it enough to know how this goes, man. It's just not fun to have to clean. So I'll go ahead and throw the gloves on, get this baby lubed up, and we'll hit it. All right, so take your flitz, coat the bit real good. Almost want to saturate it, especially the first time around. All right, we'll start with the striker safety first, a little tiny part. Let's get some flitz on there. It's basically going to be like that, you know, kind of just glob it on there, and then we'll polish it up. It's like instant magic. I love it. Now we're going to hit those edges real good too. It'll really start heating up in your hands too. Another benefit of these gloves. You can almost grip it like this and the part will just spin in your hand. It's gonna heat up though. Once it's hot, you're pretty much ready to move to a different spot. The whole thing's pretty hot. I'm just gonna hit the rest of it real quick. Hit the top one more time. That's going to be perfect. I can already tell. It feels nice and hot. You're pretty much there, man. You've done it. Oh, yeah. Look at that. And that's not even really cleaned up very good. I'm going to clean it up with some CLP, some gun oil. It'll be blinging here in a minute. Oh, man. I can tell that's going to be buttery smooth. I mean, this is where it's at. If you do anything, this alone is going to be just night and day right here. And then the lighter springs are going to make it just that much better. So go ahead and say that the striker safety is done at this point. Now we're going to go ahead and polish the whole striker. Love it. Looks good. You don't need to polish the whole striker safety. It's just this critical top hat that's most important. You notice I didn't do the inside. It's not really necessary, but if you got time to do it, go for it. The whole striker, we'll go ahead and do it because springs are moving on here. We want to make sure this part is completely smooth, burr-free. Don't want anything snagging or grabbing. We just want efficiency. So we'll lube it up, and we will do the same thing. Make sure your bit's lubed up good. Now it may help to go ahead and just clean your bit off. You've got more in the kit, but you can really extend the life of these bits quite a bit. Just keep them clean. Try not to hit them too hard on real sharp edges and you'll be fine.
Definitely getting hot. That's just trying to keep moving.
All right, this is the engagement area here. This is a really critical piece to polish. Engagement surface here, most critical. Doing one more once over, and then we're done. That's it, man. Oh yeah, look at that. So this is the engagement area here. Most important feature, just blinging. So we gave that a lot of good attention there. I'm gonna clean them up with some CLP gun oil and they'll be real shiny. You know, I barely hit the tip of the striker there. I mean, you can, it's not necessary. Just a quick little once over, it's all good. But we spent the most time back here on that engagement area, on that face right here. So this is awesome. All right, we'll go ahead and clean them up. And we'll go ahead and put the lighter springs back in the slide and we're done with the slide. All right, I got everything else cleaned up. I'm gonna take some CLP, gun oil, anything will work. Just wanna get a little shine on there. Get some of that grime off of there, you know, that polish residue. I wasn't kidding about the whole polish going everywhere, was I? If this is your first time, this is how it goes, man. First time I did it, you know, had all the parts, pistol grip frame, everything on the table, and it was just coated in flits at the end of it. All right, so the striker here just looks phenomenal, really shiny, perfect, and smooth. Most important, how does it feel? Feels amazing on that engagement area. This is going to translate into a clean, smooth, beautiful trigger pull. Can't wait. All right, clean up this little safety real quick. I like how this one would just roll on the bit real nice. Made it really easy to polish. Look at that. That is absolutely pristine. Now we could make these, you know, pristine and sell them this way, but I think this is the most economical way. Just do a little polishing. Now if you don't want to do any of this, you can just send it in to us and we'll do it for you. We do have a custom shop, so we do this sort of thing. That is just awesome. It's going to be night and day. They just can't afford to do this at Smith & Wesson because these guns are going to be just expensive. No one's going to want to pay for it off the shelf. Until you do it yourself, you really don't appreciate it anyway. That's beautiful. All right, cool. So we're ready to put the slide back together. All right, so these are all the parts you should have in front of you here for the slide. So we got our slide, barrel, a recoil spring, and guide rod. There's the little set screw for the sight right there. Make sure you have that, the back plate, and then our striker assembly here. So we've got the striker sleeve and the little spring that goes with it, the striker spring. This is the lighter MCARBO striker spring, and the striker spring bushing, which captures it. So this is the way it'll all go together right here. Then we got the striker safety all polished up and beautiful. Look at that thing. And the lighter striker safety spring, and then the little guide that captures inside the striker safety spring. That's it. All right, so we'll start by putting our striker back together. So we'll take the striker and the striker sleeve with that little spring that came with it. All right, and slide the striker right through just like this. All right, and you'll notice there's really only one way for it to go together. It's just like that. If you tried to put it together like this, it's not really going to fit right. So it goes just like this. You know, this larger portion of the striker will fit right in that channel like that. And that other little tab facing out, it's perfect. So now what we'll do is we're going to press down on the striker right here. So we'll set it inside a hole on the bench block so we can push down on that sleeve just like that, because we need to put the spring right over top. So we'll put the lighter striker spring over top of the striker. And now we have to compress everything. We'll take our little collar, this little narrow end is going to go down in the spring, and that little notch is going to locate right here in that little flat area that we were polishing up real good. It's going to locate in the middle right there. All right, so there's a narrow side. So we'll go ahead and we'll just push down on the striker spring. And either side's fine. You can go on this side or you can flip it around on this side. Either one will work. You just want to make sure it captures just like that on the actual striker itself. So that little retainer is keeping it in place, that bushing's keeping that striker spring compressed in place. All right, we're good, look at that. So now we can go ahead and slide the striker right into the slide. So pick up the slide, we're gonna drop it right in. Let it sit there, just like that. This is the cool part here, you know, reassembly, we can kind of see how it all works together. So when you push on that sleeve, notice how that hole opens up. So we're gonna have to do that to get the actual striker safety in place. So we'll take our striker safety all polished up and beautiful looking. All right, this end here is the engagement end. That's gonna go inside the slide, and this wider end back here has got the rim on it. That's just gonna locate on the top of the slide there. So when I push down on that plastic, you'll see it moving, opens up that hole really well. Now I can drop in that striker safety just like that. Get it in, should drop all the way through. You can push it down. All right, it's in there. Now you can let go of the plastic and it's gonna locate. Locates right in place, it's sticking up, protruding through. Perfect. Awesome, man, that's looking good. I always like that. I mean, it's cool how you can conceptually put it back together and understand the operation. So then take the striker safety spring and the little plastic guide. We're gonna drop it right in the hole there. And what we'll have to do is compress it as we push the slide over. Everything's ready to go. This is a great time to get all the tools needed to get that sight back in place. So we'll need our masking tape again. We'll go ahead and get it set up on this side here. And initially, all we gotta do is just hit it enough to get that spring captured, and then we can work on the finer details. So I'm just going to layer it up with some masking tape, a couple good hits with the hammer, and we should be in there. And most importantly, I want to make sure that I've got this spring captured and that it's going to compress under the sight. So what I got to do is take my little micro tip, compress the spring, and just get it underneath that sight, just like that. And then I can take my other hand and just give it a couple good taps with the hammer until I can get it to slide over enough to hold that spring down. So it's not too bad just to kind of hit it in your hands like that, and now it's holding it, so that's good. So now we can really focus on the finer details of getting it in place, maybe do a better job taping it up there. I'm gonna use the dowel rod to get it the rest of the way. Just keep an eye as we're tapping it and sliding the sight over top of the spring. We just wanna make sure we capture it. So I'm gonna use the dowel. Perfect. All right, everything's looking good. It's compressing. You know, it doesn't hurt to check it. All right, good. So it's in there. So now I'm gonna use the dowel, keep tapping away with it. This is when the dowel really pays off here. Almost there. You can see we're making pretty good progress. All right, so the dowel's kind of, there we go. I mean, that's pretty much there. I might need one little tap with the punch. So I'm going to take some of that tape, layer up that edge. Take my little 3/32 and get it right on that edge. Nice little tap there. That's pretty much right where I want it right now. I'm going to give it just one more tap. Perfect. All right, perfect. I'm happy with that. Nice even spacing on both sides. So I'm gonna go ahead and put the set screw in it. Remember the blue Loctite this time. All right, I got the rear sight set screw. Gonna take a little bit of blue 242 Loctite. Just put a couple dabs on it. All right, that's perfect. That'll hold it in place. Just doesn't have the temp rating that red Loctite has, but should be totally fine on the top of the slide there, unless you're just shooting a ton of ammo. Should be in good shape. It's really not worth having to go through the heat gun operation again. But if you're not going to take it apart again, by all means. All right, any excess, wipe it off. All right, good. So we are pretty much there. Look at that. Just shining, looking beautifully smooth. Love it. All right, so what we'll have to do next is compress that plastic sleeve so we can get the back plate on. So the back plate's going to go on just like this. All right, we'll get it started. Just kind of lined up, and then we'll take our micro tip flathead and we'll push down on that plastic sleeve right there. See it sticking out? We're just going to push down and then push the back plate all the way up. Just like that. Awesome. All right, good. So we're pretty much there now. We can go ahead and test the operation here. So you shouldn't be able to push your striker all the way forward. See no striker coming through, but if you, I'm going to be gentle here. You push down on your striker safety, you can push your striker all the way forward. All right, so go ahead and just check it real quick, make sure you're good. Perfect. All right, so everything's back together in the slide. Just got to drop the barrel right in. So it drops right in place, and then recoil spring and guide rod just drops right in like this, and it locates right there in that lug on the barrel. There we go. Slide is done. Pretty simple. This is going to be amazing. I can't wait to get the rest of this back together. So halfway there, stay with me. All right, so we're halfway there. We've got to disassemble the frame now. So really, we'll go quickly through it and then we'll pull it all apart. It's real straightforward. So we've got the locking block up here. We've got the takedown lever right here. And we've got our ejector right here. We've got our Sear back here. Now take notice, this portion of the Sear is what engages with the striker. So when we take a look at the slide again real quick, we polished up this surface really nicely on the striker here, and then this is the striker safety. So the striker engages this portion of the Sear back here. So we're going to polish that up real nice. And we've got the striker safety right here. Well, this part of the trigger bar is what engages with that striker safety up here. So we want to make sure it's nice, burr-free, and we want to make sure it's polished up really good. So we're going to polish up the trigger bar, especially this portion here, and also this portion up here. That's what engages with the Sear. As you pull back on the trigger, it pushes the Sear down back here, allowing that striker to go forward. So those are the items we're going to polish up real nice. This is also your Sear deactivation lever right here. So whenever you're doing the takedown, you can do that like we talked about early on, or not. It's up to you. So what we'll do is we'll disassemble the frame real quick, and then we'll get into the polishing, replace the springs, and we're done. So get your frame set up on your bench block like this. We're going to tap out these two pins right here. They're exactly the same, but it'd be nice to keep them separated and put them back in the same place. Take your 1/8 inch punch, and we're going to tap them right out. All right, there's one of them right there, standard roll pin. Set that down, tap out the front one. There's a second roll pin there, so you can see they're exactly the same. So I'm going to keep them separated anyway, but just in case, no need to sweat it if you get them mixed up. Now we need to remove the takedown lever. Just push it all the way up like that, and then you'll wiggle it out. There's a little piece in there that locates on the opposite side. You can see it right here. See that little tab down in there on the takedown lever? So that's what locates in that little tiny channel right there. There's another notch right there for it to pop out through. There's a takedown lever. So there's that little tab that's got to kind of find its way through that locking block there. So we'll set the takedown lever aside. Now it's a matter of getting this trigger hinge pin out. So we'll push it out from this side. 1/8 inch punch again. Should be able to just push it right through. Nice and easy. You can see it's got a little head on it there, so there's really only one way to put it in, and that's through the left side of the frame, and it locates in that little recess right there. So we'll set down the trigger hinge pin. Now we can see it start coming apart here. So we'll pull out the punch, and you'll see how that trigger return spring locates on that trigger hinge pin right there. All right, now it's free. Good. We're pretty much there. Now all we have to do is lift out both assemblies. So the locking block and the Sear housing, we'll lift them out. I like to take the punch and then just kind of pull up on that locking block. And you'll see that's already starting to move. And then take your punch and kind of leverage back here on the Sear housing. And it's all pretty much loose at this point. So we can pull them all out slowly, get a nice good look. The Sear housing's in there a little tighter. All right, so there it is. So the Sear housing right there locates in the trigger bar, just like this. This is the most important thing. So when we put it back together, we need to make sure it locates just like that. You can see that little leg of the trigger bar, how it sits in that Sear housing real nice right back here. So that's exactly what we want to replicate. And obviously too, this portion of the trigger bar has to line up with the Sear right here. So we'll go over it again, but I always like to point it out as we're taking it apart. So another good view of the Sear housing here. You can see how your ejector locates in there on that Sear pin right here. And then your Sear, and your Sear deactivation lever. And you may have a magazine safety, so you'd have some extra pieces in here. This one doesn't. So if you wanted to remove that magazine safety, you just make it look just like this. These are the most essential pieces you need to make it function. So we'll set the Sear housing down for a second. Now we'll pull out the locking block and the trigger bar and the trigger. So the locking block comes right out. You can see your slide stop is attached to it there, and you can see the slide stop spring. So we'll leave all that in place, but if it fell apart for some reason, that's how you put it back in together. Real simple and straightforward. So we'll set the locking block down, and now we've just got the trigger and the trigger bar. So these come right out. You can see the frame is empty at this point. So we'll set the frame down. Take a look at this trigger and trigger bar. So you can see how everything is situated in here. You can see how this trigger return spring is situated. So you've got obviously a side here with a hook on it, and then you got a side here up front with a closed loop. Well, that closed loop needs to go through that trigger hinge pin up here. So we'll make sure we have the closed loop of the heavy duty extra power trigger return spring up here on that trigger hinge pin. And then the open little half loop is going to be back here on the trigger bar. And it's that easy. So we could further disassemble the trigger bar from the trigger, get into that. I don't really think it's necessary. We're going to mostly focus back here on this linkage on the trigger bar. So we're going to polish it up real good. All I'm going to do is remove this factory trigger return spring. Just unhook it. and you can tell them apart. It's got a little piece of cotton in there. It's not necessary to have that little cotton. That's just to reduce noise. You're not going to hear any noise with the heavy duty one. It's going to be a nice, clean pull, even, and a crisp reset, which I love about the way we designed this kit. We wanted to make sure we didn't lose any real inherent function. Obviously, you need that trigger to reset very quickly to get your follow-up shot. So we'll set this factory spring aside. We can set the trigger and trigger bar aside for a second. Obviously, we're going to come back and do a little sanding up here, make sure we get all the burrs off of this piece. I can feel it's kind of sharp right there. So all those edges are going to be sharp. You know, this is just a stamped and formed part, so these edges are naturally going to be sharp. So we'll go ahead and get it nice and burr-free and polished right up. We'll set it down for just a second, focus on the Sear housing again. So what we need to do is get the Sear out, because we got to replace the Sear spring, but also we want to do a little polishing on that Sear as well. We want to polish the backside here that engages with the striker, and we're going to polish up here this little portion underneath that engages with the trigger bar. So we'll push out the Sear hinge pin. Just take notice of the way the Sear locates in the Sear housing. You know, it's got this little tab facing up front, and obviously this little square rectangular portion back here rests in there real nicely. And there's a little tiny marking of some kind right here on the Sear. So that's important. We'll make sure it all lines up perfectly again. So we'll take our 3/32 inch punch and we're going to push out. We're going to push out that Sear hinge pin. Just pushes out like that. You can see the head on it right there that locates. Obviously it's got a bigger hole on this side than it does on this side. Makes it a little intuitive. All right, so there's the Sear hinge pin. We'll set that down. I like to keep everything in little piles too, so make a little separate pile. And there's our Sear. And the Sear, we'll just pull it right out. You can see the way it went in there. It's pretty easy to replicate, so we'll make sure we do that when we put it back together. All right, so we'll set the Sear down for just a second. We got to replace the Sear spring in here. Let's go ahead and do that before we forget. So you got this little detent that rides in the Sear spring, and then you got the Sear spring down here. Now it is painted yellow, so it's easy to tell apart. So we'll go ahead and swap this one out for the lighter Sear spring. So I'm going to put that aside. All right, got my little detent. Grab the remaining springs in the kit. All right, so this is what you should have left in the kit. So you've got your Sear spring here, you got your heavy duty trigger return spring, and this is your assembly tool for the trigger return spring. So we just need the Sear spring for now. We'll set the other two items aside. They'll be going back in a minute. So the Sear spring is going to drop right in there. One thing I like to do, just to make it a little easier on ourselves here upon reassembly, is take some of that synthetic grease, put a little bit on the end right there, and then put that little detent inside, and it's going to be glued almost together. It's captured, which is great. And then we'll put a little bit of synthetic grease on the opposite side here. That way there it doesn't just fall out on us and make it more of a headache than it needs to be. So now we'll take our lighter Sear spring and the detent, we're going to drop it right in that hole there. Might help take your punch and kind of guide it in there. All right, good. So we got the Sear spring replaced. So we can set the Sear housing aside for just a minute. All right, so real quick, these are all the parts you should have here from the frame. Let's just run through them real fast before we start the polishing. So you've got your 2 pins here. This one's up front for the locking block, and you've got the other pin over here for the Sear housing. So we've got our heavy duty trigger return spring. This is the assembly tool. We've got our trigger hinge pin here, our trigger bar, takedown lever, the locking block, the slide stop here. Got our Sear housing here. We've got our Sear hinge pin, and obviously the 2 pins that are the same, but we'll keep them separated. Just want to put them back exactly the same way. All right, so before we start the polishing, let's go ahead and knock off some of these burrs on this trigger bar. We're not going to do anything to the Sear. It's just too crucial. We don't want to mess with any of the geometry, so we'll set that aside. We'll need that 1000 grit silicon carbide sandpaper and our synthetic grease. We'll go ahead and get it lubed up and get to work on it. So make sure it's, you know, wet sand here. We don't want to add any more friction than we need to. So what we're going to do is primarily focus on this little piece of the trigger bar right here. We just want to make sure it's burr free. You know, that will help eliminate some of that grittiness in the trigger pull. So we're just kind of sandwiching the side there and just really just knocking off any burrs that might be on there. Might help to fold it up a little bit and smooth it all out. This is going to contribute to that nice, clean trigger pull. I know this can be a little labor intensive, but man, I mean, there's some good intimate experience and knowledge with your firearm. That's what I love about it. By the time you're done, it's like you could fix it blindfolded. I mean, it's pretty straightforward and it's a good confidence boost too. Not to mention, really good way to get a nice clean trigger pull. It's going to really help boost that performance. So I'm just kind of hitting it at 45 there, just trying to round out those sharp edges. They don't need to be there. You know, mass production, they're not coming back to make sure everything is pristine. Just drive up the cost too much, and the way it is now, it's kind of a huge competition to see who can make them cheaper, faster. And I'm pushing pretty hard on it. I mean, this is, you know, not gonna create a problem. We're just making sure it's nice and smooth, no sharp edges. That's what I love about the 1000 grit too. I mean, it's super fine. It's not like it's anything coarse. It's gonna remove any significant amount of material. And that's also why we include such a small piece. You really can't mess this up. It's gonna wear out the paper before you do anything real extreme. And if this is something you don't want to do, send it in to us. We got a custom shop. You know, it's flat rate, shop rate. It's real simple, straightforward. We'll do all of this work for you. I guarantee you'll be delighted when you're done. And likely sending more guns this way, and that's the whole point. That's what we want. Oh yeah, that's awesome. You can already tell, just looking at it. So much better. You can see nice, clean little radiuses on there now, rather than sharp edges. And you can almost feel it with the paper, you know? Like it'll start kind of cutting into that paper, and you know you got a little rough spot there, but obviously once it smooths out, you're in the clear and you can move on. All right, that feels good. Don't feel any roughness. Maybe just a hair back here. So I'm gonna hit that a little bit more. Just kind of hitting it at 45 there. Instead of a sharp, burred up edge, it's going to be a nice, smooth, clean radius. All right, good. That feels awesome. Just check this linkage back here. Make sure there's no sharp burrs on it. I don't feel any. I'm just going to give it a slight little touch there. It doesn't need to be sharp. You know, it's going to be moving back and forth in that sear housing, so there's no need for it to grab on to the side of the sear housing. That's just going to contribute to a rough trigger pull. So I'm just kind of hitting those edges at a 45 real quick. And the polish is going to do a nice job too, knocking any burrs off, but this is a great way to prep for it. Just kind of hitting it at 45. Hitting the underside. Anything that might impact that sear housing, I just want to make sure it's nice and clean, no drag, nothing that feels out of the ordinary. It needs to be smooth as butter. All right, good. That's solid. All right, so now we can go ahead and start polishing. All right, so I'm all set up for polishing. Don't forget the eye pro. Nobody wants flits in the eye. So I got our half-ounce can of flits here. Go ahead and get this open. I'm still working with the same bit, but it does need a little cleaning, so I'll put some flits on it, and then I'm just gonna wipe it off. You can see the parts we've got here. So we've got the Sear and the trigger bar. We're going to polish them up real good. And then we'll be done polishing and done sanding already. So we're nearly there. This is the most labor intensive. This can take the most time, but we're making great progress. We'll focus on the trigger bar first. This will be the longest. We're just going to hit this whole piece and it's going to bling. It's going to be beautiful. So a clean trigger pull is what we're going to get here. Love it. All right, so we're all prepped. Let's go ahead and do this. This baby's already blinging. Look at that, already making good progress. All right, so we're gonna hit it one more time. We should be good. Clean up the bit real fast. Always helps. Polish up the part. We'll be on our way. You just don't want to keep rubbing grime back into the part, so it always helps to clean that bit, saturate it again. Look at that. She's a beauty now. polished up to perfection. That is just awesome. Still got a little bit of residue on there, but we'll clean it up with some CLP. Man, it feels buttery smooth, and that's where you're at right here. This feature back here, you know, this whole thing, this is what you want to make sure you focus the most time and attention on. The bar up here is just more for looks, cosmetics. I mean, it does help. Every little bit helps. Most important gains are going to be back here. And this little piece too that rides on the Sear. So this is great, man. I'm going to set this down. We're going to start on the Sear next. We're just going to hit the whole thing. I mean, it's a tiny little part. It's not going to hurt. So we're just, any potential burr in there, we're golden. We didn't even do any sanding on it, so we're perfectly fine. Just coat the whole thing. Clean the bit, rinse and repeat. And I'm still running the same bit here. Now I kind of chewed up the bit a little bit on some sharp edges on that trigger bar, but it's still holding. So you probably make this whole thing with one bit and still have some left over for your other pistols or whatever you want to, whatever trigger you want to polish up next. Gloves really pay off in this tiny little part like this. Gets hot, hard to hold, so it may help to kind of put it on the microfiber. So it may help put on the microfiber towel like I did there. So it's already polishing up. So it's already polishing up nice. Make sure we hit this surface back here, and obviously this surface right here, this little tab. All right, we'll hit it one more time. Clean off the bit. You know, you can do this 3 times if you like. I mean, you know, reasonable amount of polishing. You don't need to polish it for 6 hours or anything like that, but once it's smooth, that's it. You know, you're polishing to the feel. All right, it's nice and hot now, so I know we are finished. Let's see how good it looks. I already ripped the glove. Look at that, nice and shiny. All right, so I'll go ahead and clean up some CLP. We'll come back and we'll inspect. All right, so I already wiped them down real quick with some CLP. Wouldn't hurt to get a Q-tip, saturate it real good, some CLP, and just get into these tight little crevices here. You just want to get any polishing residue that's left over. Doesn't help. There's a lot jammed in there, so I just kind of soaked it a little bit, making sure I get all that residue out of there. All right, trigger bar looking good. Generous helping of CLP, clean it up real good. No residue, if we can avoid it. Look at that, just blinging. That's what we want, man. Should feel nice and smooth right here on this engagement surface. That's awesome. Beautiful. All right. There's still going to be an edge here. You want there to be an edge. This is the Sear. We don't want to get too crazy with it. And the trigger bar just looks awesome. I mean, this thing is as shiny as can be, buttery smooth all the way around. That's going to lead to a nice, clean trigger pull. That's awesome, man. So we're ready to reassemble. So this is everything you're going to need here for the frame reassembly. I've got everything kind of separated into groups. We got the trigger and locking block section over here, and we got the Sear housing with the Sear. We'll put the Sear housing back together real quick. So you can see here's the Sear housing. We've got our lighter Sear spring already in place with that detent like we did earlier. And then we've got our Sear that we just nicely polished. Make sure you get all that flitz off of there and get stuck in these little holes real easily. So this little flat face here is what's going to face the rear, right? The ejector is pointing forward. It's going to face the rear of the Sear housing, all right? And that little hole is going to be facing you like that. And that little shallow pocket's going to be facing you when it's in this orientation. It's going to drop right in. This little tab is facing you in this orientation. The ejector's on the back side. And you want to make sure we get that Sear up on top of that little spring and detent. So it's up on top, and then we're going to line up the holes. And we want to flip it around and make sure that we can get this side here, because that's where the little short pin with the head on it, this is your Sear hinge pin, that's going to be captured in this larger pocket right here. So we're going to line it up and push it through. Helps if you look on the opposite side as you're pushing on it. So I'm aligning it visually. Yeah, that's a good angle right there. Kind of compressing it, pushing it forward, getting it all lined up, and then it pushes right through just like that. All right, we want to make sure it's fully compressed, make sure the ejector's located in place. It is. And we'll go ahead and we'll just delicately push down on the Sear here, make sure it's moving up and down. Oh yeah, man, that's gonna be beautiful, like butter. All right, so the Sear is installed with the lighter Sear spring. Let's go ahead and set the Sear housing down and get the trigger bar and trigger up to speed. So what we need to do now is make sure we get our trigger return spring installed before we go any further. So grab your heavy duty trigger return spring from the kit. We'll go ahead and we'll situate it the exact same way it was factory spring. So we'll go ahead and get this loop that's on the heavy duty spring to locate right there. It just kind of hooks right through. That little hook is facing up. You can see that. And then we're going to let it flop forward. Just kind of keep your finger on that hook. And we're just going to push it up forward. Take our little assembly tool. We're going to slide it right through, making sure that we capture that loop on the trigger return spring. It's going to make life so much easier. So we got it prepped. Just make sure it's completely flush. Make sure it's all lined up to get it through. There we go. All right, so make sure there's nothing sticking out. Really does a heck of a job keeping everything in place and making this a stress-free install. All right, so now we got the trigger and trigger bar set up with the heavy-duty trigger return spring. We got our Sear housing here ready to go. Now we just need to make sure we get the appropriate alignment. So we'll take our trigger bar insert it into the sear housing. This little skinny leg right here goes in that channel right there, and we'll look up top and make sure that little loop is hitting the sear like it's supposed to. All right, good. So we'll hold it in place. It's a little forgiving, so it's not a huge deal. You don't have to have it like completely exact. Just want to make sure that it's obviously in this pocket right here. So we're going to kind of pitch it, grab the frame. We're going to drop this linkage in place. So lead in with the trigger. All right, keep everything in place on that sear housing. All right, now what we need to do is there's a notch on either side of the sear housing there. See them? They locate inside the frame. There's a couple channels right up front here. There's a channel right there and a channel right there on either side that they locate into. So we'll go ahead and drop it in place, making sure the sear housing, those little notches line up with the notches in the frame, making sure we got our linkage in place. All right, now we're going to push it all down evenly. Hear that nice snap? All right, looking good. Now just make sure that sear housing is completely compressed. It is. Check your linkage real quick, make sure that's good to go. It's moving back and forth freely. Make sure that little hump there on the trigger bar, that bottom one, is hitting the sear. All right, good. You can see it moving. All right, we're pretty much staged and ready on the downhill stretch now. All right, so now we just need to install our sear housing pin. So grab your bench block, grab the sear housing pin. This is that roll pin. Remember, there's two that are the same. Set up, tap it right in. Take your 1/8 inch punch and we'll finish it right off. All right, equal amount of spacing on both sides, good to go. All right, cool. So we've got our sear housing installed with the trigger bar, the trigger return spring especially, triggers in place, our sear housing pins in place. Now it's just really simple. We're just gonna take our locking block with our slide stop attached. Remember the spring, how it locates in there. All right, we're gonna drop it right in over top of the trigger. Just like that. We'll compress it. Fits in like a glove. And then we want to get our trigger hinge pin in place right here. So take our trigger hinge pin. Remember this is the longer one. It's got the head on it, right? Similar looking to that sear pin. We'll go ahead and we'll start on this side because it's got the bigger cutout, that recess for the head of the pin. We'll get it in place. Now we'll just look on the opposite side, pull the trigger forward, get it lined up in position so we can push that little assembly tool right out. Just kind of helps you pull forward on the trigger, you know, look from the top. But primarily going to be looking from this side, and we'll just push down on the bench block as we're sort of looking through. And if you need to take a punch, kind of push it forward a little bit more, you can. You can just push forward on this front portion of the trigger where the assembly tool is. All right, slides right through. There's the assembly tool. All right, make sure that pin's fully seated. There we go, look at that. You also want to double check and make sure inside that that loop of the spring is over top of the hinge pin, which it is. Perfect. All right, we can take a quick look at the rest of the linkage too, make sure we're good. Look at that, sear moving up and down. Beautiful, that feels good too, man. That's nice and clean. Good quick reset too. Perfect. All right, so now we just gotta put the takedown lever in there and most importantly, the locking block pin before the lever. So we'll get the pin in there, take our 1/8 inch punch, drive it the rest of the way home. Definitely wanna make sure nothing's sticking out on this side because this is where the takedown lever is going to be operating. So I'm going to make sure that's completely flush, if not recessed a hair. All right, it's more important than this side. So we want good operation of the takedown lever. We don't want to have this pin impeding that operation. Then we'll take our takedown lever. You'll notice the circle there, clean circle except that tab right there. So we want to make sure we get that tab in the notches. So you can see the notches right here on this side. And then on the inside, it's right here as well. So we're gonna line up the notch first, get it in there, line up that notch, get it through, and then find the other notch on the opposite side. There we go. All right, go ahead and situate it like this because we're gonna put the slide on. But we're set, man. All right, so frame's all reassembled. Slide has been reassembled. All we gotta do is put it back together. So right here, this recoil spring and guide, you know, it's on a flat surface there that doesn't really have much of a notch keeping it centered on that barrel. So it'll move from time to time. Just make sure it's good and centered before you slide it back on. Otherwise it'll fight you a little bit, but put the slide on. We'll just pull back, hit the takedown lever, and we're good to go. That's it. Simple as that. Functions, pull the trigger. Oh man, that is awesome. All right, hold it back, rack it. Good, clean reset too. Oh man, I love this. This is one of my favorites now, I can just tell you that. I'm gonna enjoy shooting this. Man, all right, this might be one that I carry now. I like this. Really crisp, clean. Oh, perfect. All right, let's see what kind of modified trigger pull we got. 2 pounds, 3 ounces. Let's take one more to confirm. 2 pounds, 4.7 ounces. Well, there you have it, guys. Absolutely amazing. Can't beat this kind of custom trigger work for the Shield pistol. It's all about the detail, and we did it in this video. Thank you for sticking with me. I hope you enjoyed it and you found it useful. We always appreciate a like or a subscribe on YouTube. Oh, that is absolutely amazing. That feels night and day different. Effortless. And that trigger reset is crisp, and that's what we wanted for this kit. We want to make sure we had a really solid trigger reset for those follow-up shots, and not to mention we wanted to make sure we had a nice even trigger pull reduction across the board. So we did the full spectrum of springs and the polishing. All of that together is what led us to that nice comprehensive night and day effect. Really love the detail, all the hard work that we put into this kit, man. I'm stoked, but I really get excited about hearing you guys' feedback on it. I can't wait. Can't wait to hear. I just love the enthusiasm. I love to hear guys getting those awesome results. So if you get some really phenomenal results of this kit, comment in YouTube, give us a like, a subscribe, whatever. We always appreciate the support in any way possible. Thank you, MCARBO Brotherhood, especially for your ideas and your support. And as always, happy shooting.